Good afternoon and welcome to RSSL's webinar, which is part of our Veganuary webinar series. Today we are providing an insight into some of the manufacturing challenges faced when bringing vegan products to the market. I hope you're all staying safe and well during the current pandemic we all find ourselves in. I'm delighted to introduce my colleagues Barbara Hurst and Christina Holt, who will be here delivering the technical aspects of the webinar this afternoon on behalf of RSSL. I will be here to support them. My name is Emma Bridges, and I'm a Senior Account Manager within our commercial team. Barbara is going to cover the manufacturing aspects for vegan products, and Christina is going to cover the claim substantiation and testing perspective. So before we get started, let's just share with you some information in case you're having any technical issues and also wish to pose a question as the team are presenting. For any technical issues that you're having, please send a short message within the question chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and the team here will then respond to you directly. Whilst the team are presenting, if you have any questions you wish to ask, please feel free to submit these using the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll then do our best to answer questions at the end of the formal presentation. If you have any confidential questions, please email me and we will come back to you independently. Okay, so now all the admin has been sorted, let's proceed with the webinar. And let me start by telling you a little more about RSSL, so you can then understand why we are able to share our knowledge with you today. So RSSL has supported the global food industry with a broad range of services since 1987, and we continue to do this even during the COVID-19 pandemic situation we all find ourselves in. Our working practices have adapted to ensure we meet government guidelines, but our scientists continue to be on site completing projects for our clients. We work for many of the top global companies through to small startups too. Our UCAS accredited facility in Reading is where our team of 330 staff are based, and our technical expertise covers a broad range of services including chemistry, physical sciences, biochemistry, as well as food technology. It is our expertise in supporting the industry with testing and consultancy for vegan product manufacturing that is relevant to today's subject. One of our key strengths is our multidisciplinary teams available to meet client needs to deliver their projects, which I hope will be demonstrated throughout today's webinar. Our expertise as a business is extremely broad. We provide a range of services to support both innovation programs as well as food safety and quality manufacturing support. Our food safety and quality services include a broad range of services. Our routine product and ingredient testing includes services including allergens as well as meat and fish speciation, which are all relevant for vegan product manufacture. We also support with physical and chemical contaminant identification, such as taints, foreign body identification, as well as more complex investigations when clients are having issues, for example, development projects, as well as potential manufacturing challenges. Over the past few years, the RSSL team have been supporting a number of clients with the development and manufacture of vegan products, and it is insights from this that is key to today's subject. So this slide just provides an overview of what we'll be covering today. So I'll now hand over to Barbara and Christina to present the technical content of this webinar and tell us more about the challenges and aspects to consider when manufacturing vegan products. We'll then do our best to answer any questions that you have asked. So over to you, Barbara.
Thanks very much, Emma. So what I'm going to talk to you today is we're going to look at some of the regulatory landscape around the term vegan. We're going to delve a little bit into how a consumer interprets the term vegan. We're then going to have quite a big focus actually on what the risk is to allergic consumers. So clearly vegan is primarily a food quality thing, but clearly we have a risk to allergic consumers, which is all around food safety. So we're going to focus a bit on that. We're then going to think about the supply chain considerations that you need to consider if you're manufacturing vegan. And then we're going to think about how the actual practice of managing vegan in production is. So let's start on the regulatory landscape, and it may come as a surprise to you that vegan as a claim itself is not defined in regulation either within Europe or within the UK. That makes it quite difficult, of course. So vegan as a term is actually a voluntary claim. Nobody makes you make it. And as I say, it's not defined in regulation. So what do you have to help guide you? Well, under Food Information for Consumers 1169/2011, because vegan is a voluntary claim, it does specify there are things that you must not do with a voluntary claim. And you must not mislead the consumer, and the claim that you're making must not be either ambiguous or confusing to a consumer. Let's think about those just for a moment. So we all understand really what vegan means. You know, you're not allowed to have any animal ingredients in it or any animal derived ingredients. So clearly, if you did have either animal ingredients or animal derived ingredients in, that would be misleading. When we think about that term ambiguous or confusing, and we are going to talk about may contain labelling throughout this next section, you could argue that if you're making the voluntary claim of vegan that's not allowed to have any animal ingredients in, but then you put may contain, whether it's milk or egg or fish, that could be considered ambiguous or confusing. So I think we have to accept that this area is quite complicated. Now, what does our regulator say? Our regulator is very clear. The FSA absolutely encourages consumers to always read the full labelling. There's a very clear message from them. That full labelling includes the ingredient list and any potential warnings that might be there. So let's think about the guidance that we have. So the Vegan Society in the UK, very, very clear about what veganism means to them. It's an ethical choice. It's a way of living. They're also very clear about the fact that they expect those who are going to use their vegan logo and who are authorised by them is that they seek to exclude as far as possible and practical all animal and animal derived materials. So what's clear from there is they are very clear about please do not add them in and do your level best to make sure you don't have them as a cross contaminant, but they do not expect perfection. Now, when we look at what retailers, manufacturers, food service businesses, they will have and can and indeed do interpret the term vegan differently. When we look at what guidance is out there, and I refer probably mainly to the Food and Drink Federation guidance, most guidance for vegan does allow precautionary allergen labelling if, after you've been through the risk assessment process, you know that there is a real and demonstrable risk of something being there. They absolutely advise you that you do warn a potentially allergic consumer. So let's think about how the consumer interprets these phrases. And I don't know how many of you joined the webinar yesterday that we had as part one of this series, but my colleagues very clearly talked about what were some of the motivations for people to change to a vegan diet, whether it's 100% of the time or more on the flexitarian or just reducing their meat content. So we've clearly seen a huge rise, we know that. And their motivations for doing it absolutely varies, whether they are doing it for a lifestyle choice, a perception of health, whatever. What isn't clear, though, is there are lots of different terms out there to describe a product that might be vegan. So clearly vegan, obviously. You also see these other terms, things like vegan friendly or 100% plant-based or suitable for a vegan diet. And what we're thinking about the risk here is that consumers may see that vegan label maybe on the front of a packet or part of the description of the food. And then because they very clearly understand what vegan means, they may then not go on to read the ingredients list. And if they did have an allergy to one of those animal-derived ingredients, they might just make the assumption that it is safe for them because they are very clear in the main about what is not allowed when a food is labelled as vegan. So let's think about these food safety aspects. And really there is clearly a risk here to allergic consumers. And when we think about what the regulated allergens are, and we know those very clearly from our Food Information for Consumers legislation, and I've just highlighted the 5 here that clearly would not be allowed under a vegan labelled food. And we're also very clear under Food Information for Consumers that if any of those 5 ingredients have been added at any level deliberately, they must be declared in the ingredients list. And we know clearly none of those are allowed to be in a vegan labeled product intentionally. We get that. But what about may contain? And this is where the dilemma comes really, is does the term vegan equal or not equal the same as allergen free? And the risk to the allergic consumer is that they may make the assumption that they are indeed equivalent. So they may assume if they have a milk allergy, a fish allergy, an egg allergy, that if a product is labeled vegan, automatically it must be safe for them. And the challenge we have here is that some retailers and manufacturers, for them, vegan absolutely is the equivalent of allergen free, but for some it is not. And that's where this risk really arises. So let's think about this term risk assessment. We all understand that we have to do it, but really risk assessment is a bigger piece. It's really a whole risk analysis exercise. And the first part of risk analysis is the risk assessment piece. So you have to identify where risks may occur. Clearly, we're talking here about particularly an allergen risk, but also we're going to cover some of the quality aspects of vegan. You then have to think about, well, I've identified the risks. How do I manage them? Through putting controls in place and providing evidence that those controls are indeed effective at reducing the likelihood of that risk to occur. And then the communication piece is all about telling the consumer what you've added and warning them about the things that may be there. So when risk assessment is being done, it's really important that you cover all aspects, and that has to include the supply chain. And we're aware, of course, when you're labeling products as vegan, that we've talked a little bit about the food safety aspect, and that's clearly something you obviously have to focus on. But also there can be a risk to the quality of the product. Now, clearly, you don't want pieces of ham in a vegan labeled product, but that might not be a risk from a food safety aspect, but it absolutely will be a risk to the quality of the product. So you have to really take both of these aspects into consideration. Where risks have been identified and you've put the controls in place to manage them, all of those controls need to be validated. Now, my colleague Christina is going to talk to you a little bit about cleaning validation later on, so I'm not going to steal her thunder now, because most of the controls you'll have in place will actually be physical controls and will require physical validation. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And the reason you need to do validation, verification, and monitoring of controls is all about providing evidence that the risks that you identified have all been mitigated. Clearly, this whole process must be documented. So all of your choices, your rationales, and your decisions need to be documented and indeed recorded. When you're doing risk assessment, it is all about the dose of something that you may deliver to the consumer if the risk indeed occurs. And that's particularly important when we're thinking about the food safety risk in terms of allergens. So let's think about the supply chain first of all. Clearly, if your supplied materials come in with animal products, either intentionally or unintentionally, there is no way that you can then manage them out during production. So really, really important that you take careful note of everything about the supply chain that you have. So you need to have a very robust process to assess the risk based on the information that the supplier is providing to you. And I guess one really important pointer to think about here is you need evidence from the suppliers that their controls that they have in place to manage or minimize the risks of unintentional presence of animal products are indeed effective. So it's important that you don't just ask the question, are you controlling the risks? But actually you should probably be asking them for, provide the evidence to me so that you can demonstrate that. Now, of course, undertaking physical regular audits of suppliers was quite something we were all used to doing. That's become, of course, much, much harder since COVID. So you need to think about how are you going to get over that as a challenge. One consideration here is to think about, are all the suppliers who are supplying into you are aware that those materials are going to be used in vegan labeled products? Do you have any kind of a legal contract with them? And then the big difficult question is, what do you do when a supplier of a material tells you that there is a risk through may contain warning of perhaps an allergen or any other material that wouldn't be allowed in vegan. You have to really be clear with them about where is that risk coming from. And I guess a watch out here, I've seen more and more manufacturers now asking people to declare, okay, you're saying may contain, but at what level? If you're going to ask them for a physical amount of that unintentional presence, you need to think about what are you going to do with that level when you have it. And the trap I see people falling into is the reason they ask for a level, I understand, but suppliers are often very reluctant to actually say 0. So think about what you're going to do with that information by asking it. Okay, let's think about dedicated versus non-dedicated production. Clearly, if you're working in a dedicated production environment where you have nothing within your production environment that contains anything that will not be allowed in a vegan or a vegetarian product, then really the only risks you have to consider are supplied materials that we've just talked about, and indeed people. So you'd have to make sure that people who are coming into your production area do not bring anything in that wouldn't be allowed. And clearly putting the controls in place of, PPE and hand washing, we should all be very good at that by now, of course, are relatively straightforward. However, today, most vegan production really is being done in non-dedicated facilities where you're going to likely have manufacturers that are already handling some meat and or animal products. Most manufacturers are handling multiple allergens, and some of those might be the ones that are clearly not allowed in vegan production. We're also in the position now where the term free from an allergen perspective is increasingly common. And when you're putting an allergen-free label on a product, you're clearly advertising that to the most sensitive individuals. So that's going to carry the highest food safety risk. But you might also be juggling other claims such as organic, kosher, halal. There are lots of different things to be considered here. And you've really got to start weighing up the food safety and the food quality risks. And clearly, if you're making an allergen-free claim, I hope that that comes at the very top of that food safety risk list. But vegan may well come quite close after that, even though it clearly is a quality claim that you're making, but that there are recognised food safety risks within making that claim. Okay, so let's think about how you might manage vegan in production. And this is absolutely not an exhaustive list, but really to kind of give you some pointers of the things when we're out and about and working with manufacturers that we see and we try and help guide a bit on. So let's take the first one, receipt and storage of materials. Well, clearly there can be challenges around that if you're making in a non-dedicated area where you've got materials that are for vegan production and some that are not. And it might be through your risk assessment that you've identified that there are risks around that area, particularly maybe around spillages or around mispicking risks, where one of the controls you might choose to put in place are to make some of those areas as dedicated storage areas. But that really should come out of your risk assessment. Spillages and split packaging, if they are a common occurrence, you kind of need to fix that first rather than thinking about, well, I'll just move them into a dedicated area and then everything will be okay. And without question, the biggest risk in any kind of warehousing area is that things need to be in intact packaging, spillages and split packaging need to be managed. But then your main risk is of mispicking, and the main controls you're going to have in place are to be absolutely confident that the right materials are picked and go into the right production. When we think about the next stage of moving materials within the facility, so taking them out of the warehouse, putting them into production, and then moving them around the production facility, labeling and traceability are absolutely critical. When we think about the hierarchy of risk, and we always put the consumer front of mind with that, one of the most serious things that you can do is to make the wrong material, the wrong recipe, by picking the wrong material or using the wrong tote of something. So if something is hard to identify, either because it isn't labelled at all or it's a handwritten label that can easily be misread, then you have absolutely increased your risk of misuse. So when you're thinking about validating controls, this is physical validation, typically done by controlled challenge studies to make sure you have the evidence to know that that won't happen. When we move on to production itself, scheduling is likely to be a control that you're going to have in place in most factories, particularly if you're managing claims other than just vegan. So you're going to have strict scheduling. That is a very important control measure. And again, if that goes wrong, then your risk is potentially very high to a consumer. So you need to be absolutely sure that that as a control measure has been properly validated and you have evidence to say that the scheduling cannot be changed if you have set rules in it. You might introduce some physical barriers or dedicating some equipment or some people. And again, that should be borne out of your risk assessment to say that you understand there's a risk. And actually, one of the ways that you are choosing to control that risk is by putting some things in place to prevent either environmental contamination or contamination through people. Cleaning, of course, is going to be a control in any kind of production facility. And as I say, my colleague Christine is going to talk about it just shortly. Moving on then, we think about managing work in progress and managing rework. Again, one of the risks you've got here are labelling and traceability, much like we talked about of moving materials around a facility. We know that this causes issues. So again, those absolutely need to be validated to be confident that they cannot be accidentally used. And when we're thinking about rework, of course, it must be likened to like, because rework is considered intentionally adding. When we think about managing either new product development, R&D, a really important area, because you've got to think about how you're going to plan for that. How are you going to store the materials that are going to be used for these products that you're trying out? How are you going to schedule them into production? How are you going to clean any equipment down after you've made them? Because of course, some of your NPD may be using new and non-vegan ingredients. So you need to be confident that they are not posing a risk to your normal standard vegan production. The last area, but by no means the least, is thinking about management of packaging. When we talk about here approving label copy, so when you're changing a label in some way, redesigning it, in the hierarchy of risk to the consumer, this is almost certainly the most serious thing if you get it wrong. Because if you miss off an ingredient, and we're talking here about food safety risk, you miss off an allergen, that's the most serious, because every single time you make that product, the label will be wrong and a consumer will not know that you've missed that off. When we think about issuing packaging to the line and actual inline checks and line clearance at changeover, in other words, making sure you're putting the right packaging onto the product, again, in the hierarchy of risk, this is very serious. And we know that this goes wrong often and prompts recalls. Consumers are very trusting. They assume that what's written on the outside of the packet is what is going to be on the inside. Now, if the product looks very different, there is a chance that a consumer may open it, think it doesn't look right, and not consume it. But in the main, we as consumers, and I'm one myself, we are very, very trusting. So this is an area when you're thinking of doing risk assessment, you need to really put some focus on, because it is an area in my experience that is quite often overlooked. So just to summarize here, be clear on what that term vegan actually means, and are you going to allow precautionary labeling if there is a real risk? Don't miss out your allergic consumers if you're making vegan claims, because we do know that they are making assumptions, and that's something I'm sure none of you would want to have happen and go wrong. When you think about risk assessment, you must include the supply chain and all of those areas of production. There are possibly others that we didn't mention as well. And if you're in a non-dedicated production area, all those risks of unintentional presence must be identified, and all the controls must be validated to substantiate the claim. And just to finalise really is to say that these are all areas in which RSSL can support you from if you're making vegan products. We can support you with policy review, we can support you with supply chain issues you might be having. We can certainly help you with the entire risk analysis process. And now I'm going to move on to Christina, who's going to talk about some of the testing challenges that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Good afternoon. My name is Christina Holt, and I am a senior scientist in the DNA and Protein Laboratory at RSSL. This laboratory is responsible for DNA-based and protein-based analytical techniques such as animal speciation, which include meat and fish speciation, and also allergen analysis. So today I want to cover two topics with you. So firstly, we'll delve into the various different types of testing available that can help you with your claim substantiation for vegan products. And then secondly, we'll talk through some considerations for cleaning validation. So when it comes to claim substantiation, analysis can help provide evidence needed to support your claims. Analysis of products or ingredients can help back up your risk assessment and controls. Now, analysis should not be the major factor for claim substantiation. It's only one small piece of the puzzle and should always be used alongside your risk assessments, controls, and other evidence. And in fact, not all risk assessments will call for sampling analysis, as other controls assessments may be more relevant to your risks. So, before we delve into the various analytical techniques available for vegan claim substantiation, I first want to take you through some considerations. So firstly, I'd like to reiterate what my colleague Barbara Hurst has already discussed with you, which is that vegan as a claim is not defined in regulation. Now, Barbara has already gone into more detail around how this, however, I'd like to make a particular point based on analysis. And not having a definition in regulation makes it particularly difficult, firstly, for the contract lab itself to assess a fit for purpose analysis. For example, what does my analysis need to target? And also, how sensitive does my analysis need to be? And then secondly, for the food production industry to know what they need to test for and to what levels. So it's all good performing analysis and producing results, but without guidance from regulations, it can be difficult to understand the results and know what to do with these results. Now, I know that different retailers have their own codes of practice, which will all likely be different in some way. And these do provide some guidance. But if you are supplying more than one retailer, then you may well be recommended different analysis, and this can make it quite difficult. Now, my second consideration is to understand that there's not an all-encompassing analysis for vegan claim substantiation. Now, there is an array of analysis available to help you, which we'll come on to in a moment, but there's not one test that will do everything for you. And then my final consideration, I'd like you to understand that although there is an array of analysis available, there's not an analysis available for every particular animal-derived product, and therefore there may be situations where testing is not an option for you. Now, I think it's important to understand where the industry is when you're wanting to use analysis to help with your vegan claim substantiation. And this is just a snapshot summary of where we are and as it stands right now. So let's delve into the testing that's available. So there is quite a large list of animal-derived products, and to test for as many animal products as possible would be particularly expensive and in most cases just not necessary. So this is why RSSL recommends a focused risk assessment approach to determine if testing is required, and if so, what testing is required. Now, this approach needs to work closely alongside your manufacturing site's vegan risk assessment and target those particular risks. For example, if your only risk is milk protein in almond milk, then you only need to use a test that detects milk, instead of trying to complete the almost impossible task of hunting down everything that could be animal derived. Right, so let's go through some of the options we have. So for animal DNA, now this is a great option for the detection of meat residue or anything that has an abundance of DNA. but it is a weak option for some animal products such as isolated fats and proteins, for example, which do not have an abundance of DNA. Now, if the animal-derived product does not have an abundance of DNA present, then choosing a test that targets animal DNA will not give you the sensitivity that you need. You may well get a not detected result when there is in fact animal-derived products present. Now, RSSL use PCR for all animal DNA targets, and there are two options here. Animal screens, which cover an array of species in one go, such as a vertebrate DNA test, or species-specific targeting, such as just targeting pig. Now, a screening method can help assess more than one hazard at a time, which can be quite a useful tool if you're handling several different types of meat. RSSL have a vertebrate DNA test, which will allow you to screen for several animals in one analysis, and this can be cost-effective in many instances. However, a detected result from a screening method will still leave you with an unanswered question, which is what has caused the detected result? This is where a species-specific test has an advantage. You obtain a detected result from one particular species, and you automatically gain more information as to where your risks might be. Now, I often see the DNA screening method being used in conjunction with species-specific methods, where the screening method is the primary method, and if a detected result is obtained, this prompts the analysis of particular species. Now, this approach is most useful for ongoing verification controls once your controls have been set. Now, an example of this is a manufacturing site has chicken, pork, lamb, and beef on site, and they use RSSL's vertebrate screen as the primary analysis. Any detected result prompts the analysis of these individual species. And then if a chicken DNA is found to be present, then you already have narrowed down where the hazard is coming from. It would be more appropriate to use a species-specific method on its own if you were performing a cleaning validation, for example, which tends to be more targeted, or if you know that your risks are from one or two different species only. Then we come to milk. Now, there's a few options for milk detection, and it will depend on what your risk is. So a DNA-based method is not the best option in this instance, and it's much better to target something abundant, such as protein, by using an ELISA technique. Now, if it's whole milk that you're interested in looking for, then targeting the most abundant protein in milk, which is casein, is your best option here. If whey powders are your problem, then you'll need a different protein target, such as beta-lactoglobulin, which is the most abundant protein in the majority of whey powders. Now, in some instances, the risk will be from lactose powder, and in this instance, a lactose sugar-based technique would be your best option. Now, these tests are specific and would be bespoke to your risks. Then we have egg, and once again, a DNA-based method is not a good option for egg. Egg can be detected by looking for abundant proteins such as ovalbumin or ovomucoid using an ELISA technique. Now, please note that sometimes specific proteins are isolated from egg and are used in production of other products, such as wine, for example. Now, in this instance, you'll need to use a specific analysis to detect these specific egg proteins. Examples of these are ovalbumin and lysozyme. These are common egg protein isolates used in this manner. There are ELISA tests available for the detection of these proteins. And then we come to animal fats and gelatin. Now, once again, DNA is not a great target here for these products. Animal fats and gelatins are trickier to test for, and the choice of analysis will most likely be bespoke requirements and will be based on your specific situation, and it might not always be an option for you. For example, in most instances, hydroxyproline, which is an amino acid found in gelatin, may be able to be used to detect gelatin, but the limit of detection will most likely be sample dependent, and not all samples are suitable for this type of analysis. So my key message here is If you want to use analysis to assess your risks and substantiate any claims you're making, make sure the analysis you have chosen is fit for purpose and is targeting your risks. Now, a good laboratory will be able to help you make these choices. And don't forget, some animal-derived products don't even have a test designed to detect them. So testing won't always be an option. Now, this sounds complicated and there are lots of options available for you. However, with some guidance from RSSL's technical team who deal with this type of testing and help make these choices on a daily basis, we should be able to help you make sure that the choice of analysis is the right analysis for you. Now, finally, I'd like to discuss cleaning validation. Now, cleaning validation can help to provide the evidence that your cleaning is effective at removing animal-derived products from your manufacturing line and that the trace of animal-derived products are not ending up in vegan products. Now, this information can form part of your evidence for claim substantiation. But before conducting a cleaning validation, there are several things you'll need to do to make sure the cleaning validation is robust. So stage one is to make sure a risk assessment has been conducted in your factory. So you know your risks and you understand your controls. And then if cleaning is deemed a control to separate a non-vegan product from a vegan product, then it's highly likely that you're going to need to conduct some sort of cleaning validation. The next step you'll need to complete is to put together a sampling plan. Now this should outline your choice of changeover. And what I mean by this is, which non-vegan product are you going to use to demonstrate your cleaning? This will usually be based on worst case scenarios. So for example, the non-vegan product would be high in animal-derived ingredients. It would be difficult to clean and a robust analysis is available. You also need to consider what types of samples you'll be testing to prove your cleaning has been successful at removing non-vegan products. Now, cleaning validations usually consist of swabs and finished products. The swabs focus on hard to clean areas in your production line, and then finished products are usually either first offline or at production time points. There are other materials you can use, such as CIP waters, purge materials, or settle plates, and these can also be used, but they're going to be bespoke to your production line and will best suit your bespoke scenario. So the choices you make will be bespoke to you. Now, once the sampling plan is complete and the choice of analysis has been made, it is best practice to perform a piece of method verification on your bespoke samples you have chosen for your sampling plan. Now, this provides the confidence that any results generated from the analysis are robust. Now, a good laboratory should be able to guide you through this, and RSSL do have a lot of experience in helping with cleaning validation choices. The main principle with the method verification is that you're confirming that the vegan product does not interfere with the analysis to produce either a false positive or a false negative result, and that the non-vegan product produces a strong detected result, thus verifying your choice of controls. Now, once all of this is completed and documented, the final stage is to conduct the cleaning validation and generate results that will be used to provide evidence to support your claim substantiation. The cleaning validation conducted to such a standard will ensure that the evidence you collect is robust and can be relied upon. Now, it's good practice to complete the cleaning validation over 3 separate occasions and should consider variables such as changing of shift and night staff. Once the cleaning validation is successful, the claim substantiation can be backed up with cleaning verification and monitoring. And these are periodic assessments that the validation cleaning procedure is still performing correctly over time. Now, the choice of samples to use here will most likely come from a much simplified version of your cleaning validation. Now, in most instances, cleaning validation procedures will be repeated annually, or if something changes, such as new cleaning equipment or new manufacturing equipment, for example. Now, a lot of thought process and decisions have been made whilst you're putting together a cleaning validation plan. Make sure all of this is documented and conclusions have been made, and this will provide evidence towards your claim substantiation. So my take-home messages are: make sure that the analysis you're using is fit for purpose. Take time to plan your cleaning validation and document everything. This piece of work is important evidence for your claim substantiation. Now, analysis can be complicated, and RSSL are able to help you with any decisions you're trying to make about the analytical testing for cleaning validation or product testing, and can guide you through the options available for you. Thank you very much for listening.
So thank you, Barbara and Christina, for sharing your insights. As you can see, there are a number of challenges to consider when manufacturing vegan products and subsequent analytical testing for claim substantiation. Hopefully from today's webinar, you can see that support is available to ensure a successful product is launched into the marketplace. So thank you all to those attendees who have asked them questions. We will now start to work through some of those questions. So first one for you, Barbara. For food allergen-related recalls, where products that are declared gluten-free or dairy-free and then are recalled by the FSA due to the presence of wheat, dairy or other allergens, how dangerous would this be, in your opinion?
Great question. Difficult to say, first of all. So you've got to think as well, if you're making a free-from claim, you are actively encouraging those who have the most serious of allergies to eat your product. You have to also think about the brand risk. If you label something as gluten-free or dairy-free and it's found to contain anything, then it will almost certainly be a regulatory-based recall. There will clearly be a food safety risk as well. So you would be damaging your brand as well as putting allergic consumers at risk. In terms of knowing how dangerous it is, that's really where you'd need to undertake a full food safety risk assessment to understand what would be the exposure risk, what kind of dose would the consumer get, how many people out there are there with allergies. And that is something, again, we do support businesses on. So to be honest, if you're making a free-from claim and anything is found in it, that would almost certainly be a straight recall.
Thank you, Barbara. And then the second one, another one for you, Barbara. Are you able to share the insights you have regarding allergy sufferers buying into vegan products because they believe they are safe for them, perhaps without reading the packaging?
A little bit, certainly. I guess when you look at the guidance that both the Food and Drink Federation and other bodies make, and also the Food Standards Agency, they are well aware of this risk. And I think there's also anecdotal evidence from social media. And if you want to look at some of the social media around when a vegan label product that has had to be recalled, particularly because of milk, the consumers are often very vocal and indeed often quite angry. And I think if you look at it from the milk allergic perspective, they see all these vegan products on the market now, which are frankly fantastic. And those of you who heard the webinar yesterday will have seen, the really creative and innovative ways people are making these products. Lots of people with allergies don't always want to spend their time asking and asking and asking and looking. And this is kind of a shortcut to them. So we do know that it happens. And as I say, we are clear that people like the Food and Drink Federation, the Food Standards Agency, and the retailers out there are very aware of this risk.
Perfect, thank you. Next question for you, Christina. Given the use of new proteins being used in vegan food where they can be allergic and prevalence has become higher, such as pea, are you looking to develop tests to detect these?
So we are always looking at the up and coming prevalence of allergens constantly. Yes, there is a lot of concern around the amounts of peas, lentils, legumes that are being used in vegan foods, and is this going to cause more of a problem for the allergic consumer? So we do, to answer your question, yes, we do routinely look forward in our when we're looking to validate new methods.
Brilliant. And another one for Barbara. If there has been no changes in process, product, etc., should cleaning validation be completed annually, or how should it be managed?
Great question. So, in theory, if nothing has changed, you're all aware. Why would I need to repeat the cleaning validation? I think probably lots and lots of different retailers and manufacturers do expect some level of certainly formal review once a year. Perhaps you don't have to repeat the whole process 3 times over, as Christina was explaining. Maybe going through one round of it would be sufficient, but it would entirely depend on, frankly, which retailer you're working with or whether you're selling it under your own brand as to how much you do. But I would suggest, cleaning validation is an expensive exercise. You really want to do as little testing as possible in order to answer the question. So we're certainly not advocating doing too much.
Okay, and another one, this time for Christina. What happens if dedicated equipment is not possible? So if vegan and non-vegan shares a fryer, for example, would you go about testing protein in the frying oil, even though it undergoes high heat?
Okay, so this is quite a difficult question to answer because we all know that testing for proteins in such conditions, such as heating, pH, can change the protein so much that analytical techniques just can't detect it anymore. So I think you'd really have to have a good look at your risk assessments before you take your next steps in not using dedicated equipment here.
Thanks, Christina. And Barbara, question for you. There are targets for free from. What would be the max ppm for, say, egg or whey?
Okay, so let's just be absolutely clear. There is only one free from claim that has an analytical or regulated level, and that's the term gluten-free. And you are allowed no more than 20 parts per million of gluten. There are no other regulated levels for any other free from claim. So there is no level for egg, milk, nut, any of those. And there are certainly no levels for that term vegan, obviously what we've been talking about today. So there are no permitted. Again, think back to it's a voluntary, all free from claims are voluntary claims, must not be ambiguous, misleading, or confusing. So you could, on a very simple level, say, if you put a free from claim on and anything is detected, that could be both ambiguous, misleading, and confusing. So no legal limits apart from the term gluten-free.
Okay, and another one for you, Barbara.
Okay.
Question is, someone manufactures a combination of vegan and non-vegan ready-to-eat pastry products. They use casein to validate the pastry as vegan, but find it difficult to remove due to shared pastry processing equipment. Is casein the best measure for this? If so, at what level is it a problem for a milk allergy sufferer?
Oh, you have my sympathy. Trying to make pastry vegan and non-vegan is quite a challenge. So when you're considering what target to use, you want to think about something that's present at a high level, something that you know is difficult to remove, and the thing that's going to be, if you can manage to remove the casein to show as your worst case scenario that you've removed everything else, then that was a good target. I'm not surprised that you're finding it difficult perhaps to remove because, cleaning pastry equipment is difficult. There is no level that we can say, as we keep saying here, that would be a problem for milk allergy sufferers because it will depend on how sensitive that individual milk allergic person in fact is. So there's nothing, I'm afraid, to help you in terms of the regulation or indeed guidance. And again, as we've said, the term vegan is a voluntary claim. It might feel like a stuck record here, but it must not be ambiguous, misleading, or confusing. But let's also be clear, both the Food and Drink Federation and the FSA say you can, if you have a real and significant risk of something like milk, you are allowed to put the precautionary allergen label on for milk to warn the allergic consumer not to consume it. So just remember that bit.
Thank you, Barbara. And last question, just due to the time. So this one's for you, Christina. How do frying temperatures above 170 degrees Celsius affect allergens and animal DNA? And is it necessary to validate?
Okay, so the effects on the allergen protein and the animal DNA, there will be an effect. Now, it is important to say here, does that effect of the protein just mean it is no longer detected with the analysis, or is it still a concern for allergen consumers? And that's a really important point to make here. Just because your test no longer detects it doesn't mean it is not a risk for an allergic consumer. What I would recommend that you do here is you test a positive control with the analysis that you're going to use, and that will give you a good indication of if there's analysis available to help you with this. Is it necessary to validate is a difficult question. I would probably try and look for analysis that's available for you to help. And then if analysis is not necessary, other controls would definitely be necessary. So that's quite a tricky one to answer, but use positive controls to try and figure out if there's a test available that can help you with that.
Thank you, Christina. Okay, so now we've come to the end of our webinar. I hope that you found it useful, and we appreciate the questions that you have asked. As we've not managed to get to answer all of the questions in the time we have today, we will respond to you separately outside of the webinar. On behalf of the RSSL team, I would like to thank you for listening, and please do not hesitate to contact us if you have any questions or you need our support with any projects, whether it is product development, manufacturing control support, and/or product testing. We'll be sending out a copy of the slides to you following this session as well. And well, hopefully, once the pandemic situation has improved, we look forward to meeting you at future events when we're able to meet face to face. Thank you for your time, and I hope you all have a good rest of the day. And please do stay safe in these challenging times. Bye.